In 1982, a remote archipelago in the South Atlantic ignited one of the most unique wars of the 20th century. Britain and Argentina clashed in a conflict that would redefine modern warfare. But what really happened, and why does it still matter? It was a war no one saw coming. Two nations battling over a windswept islands 8,000 miles from Europe. What unfolded was a high-stakes game of diplomacy, daring naval operations, and brutal land battles fought in freezing conditions. This is the story of national pride, military strategy, and individual heroism, and the untold truths behind the Falklands War. Welcome back to the war. The roots of the Falklands War go back nearly 2 centuries, to an era when empires carved up the world and national boundaries were little more than suggestions. The Falkland Islands, windswept, remote, and sparsely inhabited, were claimed by Britain, Spain, and later Argentina, each vying for control. In 1833, Britain solidified its claim, establishing a permanent presence and expelling an Argentine settlement. For the British, it was another colonial acquisition, a strategic outpost for maritime dominance. For Argentina, it was a wound that never healed. By the late 20th century, the issue simmered as a diplomatic dispute. Argentina repeatedly asserted its claim in international forums, but negotiations with Britain stalled. Meanwhile, the islands themselves were little more than a footnote in global politics, a remote territory with 1,800 residents. By 1982, Argentina faced spiraling inflation, civil unrest, and international condemnation for human rights abuses. To distract from these problems, the junta sought a rallying cry, a quick, decisive victory to unite the country. How did Britain's own actions encourage Argentina to act? The answer lies in a string of missteps and miscommunications that left the islands vulnerable. On April 2nd, 1982, Argentina launched Operation Rosario, a carefully planned invasion of the Falklands. Argentine forces, including elite Marines and Special Forces, landed near the island's capital, Port Stanley. The British garrison, a small detachment of 80 Royal Marines, were outnumbered and outgunned. Despite their bravery, the defenders were quickly overwhelmed. Argentina declared victory, raising their flag over the islands for the first time in 150 years. In Buenos Aires, crowds erupted in celebration. For the junta, it seemed like a masterstroke. They had achieved a bloodless victory, boosting national pride and deflecting attention from domestic crises. But the triumph was short-lived. The British government, led by Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, responded with unflinching resolve. Thatcher's political future was at stake, and she framed the invasion as an attack on Britain itself. Within days, a massive naval task force was assembled, with over 100 ships and thousands of troops preparing to sail south. This operation, unprecedented in scale and distance, was a gamble. Britain faced immense logistical challenges, with no nearby bases or allies to support the mission, yet the stakes were too high to back down. What made Argentina think Britain wouldn't fight back? Their miscalculation would prove to be their undoing. The naval conflict was the backbone of the Falklands War, as control of the South Atlantic was essential for Britain to launch a ground invasion. Both sides understood this, and their strategies reflected high stakes. The British fleet, spearheaded by aircraft carriers HMS Hermes and HMS Invincible, carried Sea Harriers, helicopters, and supplies for an extended campaign. Protecting these carriers was priority number one, as their loss would mean the collapse of the entire operation. Surrounding the carriers was a protective screen of frigates, destroyers, and submarines, a floating fortress bristling with advanced weaponry. Argentina's naval strategy relied heavily on its air force and a few key surface ships. The pride of the fleet was the aging cruiser General Belgrano, a relic of World War II, but still a significant threat. The naval showdown began in earnest on May 2, 1982, with one of the most controversial events of the war, the sinking of the General Belgrano. The British nuclear submarine HMS Conqueror had been stalking the Argentine cruiser for days. The British, fearing a pincer movement in the exertion zone, gave the order to attack. 3 torpedoes were fired, 2 struck the cruiser. Within minutes, the Belgrano began to list heavily as fires raged on board. Despite the efforts of its crew, the ship sank, taking over 300 sailors with it. For Argentina, it was a devastating blow, both militarily and emotionally. The loss forced Argentina to pull its surface fleet back to port, effectively ceding control of the seas to Britain. With Argentina's navy neutralised, the danger shifted to the skies. Argentina's air force was highly trained and motivated. Using Exocet missiles, French-made weapons designed to sink ships, they launched a series of audacious attacks. On May the 4th, an Argentine super Attendard launched an Exocet missile at HMS Sheffield. The missile struck the destroyer mid-ship, igniting fuel and causing catastrophic damage. The crew fought valiantly to save the ship, but the fire proved uncontrollable and the Sheffield eventually sank. This was a sobering moment for the British. The Sheffield was equipped with advanced radar and defence systems, but they failed to detect or intercept the missile. The incident underscored the vulnerability of even the most modern warships to well-executed air attacks. As British ships moved closer to the Falklands, they entered what would become Bomb Alley. This narrow strait between the islands of East and West Falkland was the main route for resupply and amphibious landings. It also became a killing ground for Argentine pilots. In a series of daring raids, Argentine aircraft targeted British landing ships and support vessels. The frigates HMS Ardent and HMS Antelope were both sunk in Bomb Alley, their crews fighting desperately to save them. Despite heavy losses, the British fleet continued to press forward, knowing that control of these waters was vital for the success of the land campaign. How did the British adapt to these relentless air attacks? Their ingenuity in turning the tide would shape modern naval strategy. The air war over the Falklands was one of the most intense and unpredictable phases of the conflict. With Argentina's surface fleet out of the fight, the full burden of defending the island fell to its air force. Argentina's pilots faced immense challenges. To reach the British fleet, they had to fly over 400 miles from their mainland bases, leaving little time for loitering or engaging in prolonged dogfights. The rugged terrain and unpredictable weather of the South Atlantic further complicated their missions. Despite these obstacles, the Argentine Air Force launched some of the most daring attacks of the war. Flying A4 Skyhawks, Mirage 3 fighters, and Super Attendards, they perfected the art of low-altitude strikes, skimming just above the waves to evade British radar. This approach minimised detection but left pilots with mere seconds to lock onto their targets and release their bombs. One of the most dramatic moments came on May the 25th, Argentina's National Day. A flight of Super Attendards, armed with Exocet missiles located the British transport ship Atlantic Conveyor. The Exocet struck its target, igniting a massive fire and destroying crucial Chinook helicopters and supplies. This loss forced British troops to march across the island on foot, significantly complicating the ground campaign. The British Sea Harrier jets, operating from carriers Hermes and Invincible, became the unsung heroes of the air war. These jets, equipped with advanced radar, AIM-9 signed-widener missiles, provided highly effective against Argentina's aircraft. The Sea Harriers achieved a remarkable kill ratio, downing over 20 Argentine planes while suffering minimal losses. Their ability to take off and land vertically allowed them to operate efficiently from the cramped decks of the carriers, giving Britain a crucial edge. However, the air war was far from one-sided. Argentine pilots displayed extraordinary skill and bravery, often flying outdated aircraft against the technological superior Harriers. These pilots, some of whom were just 20 years old, became national heroes for their daring missions. What innovations did the British and Argentine forces introduce in this air war? Some of their tactics are still studied by militaries today. On May 21st, 1982, British forces launched their amphibious landings at San Carlos Bay, a natural harbour on East Falkland. The operation, codenamed Operation Sutton, involved nearly 4,000 troops, including Royal Marines and paratroopers. The landings were met with fierce resistance from Argentine aircraft, which launched wave after wave of attacks. The confined waters of San Carlos Bay became a death trap for British ships, earning it the grim nickname Bomb Alley. Despite heavy losses, including the sinking of HMS Ardent and HMS Antelope, British forces managed to establish a beachhead. As British forces pushed inland, they encountered their first major obstacle, the Argentine garrison at Goose Green. This settlement, home to a key airstrip, was defended by over 1,000 Argentine troops. Facing them were 450 British soldiers of the 2nd Battalion Parachute Regiment. The battle began on the night of the 27th of May, with British forces launching a surprise attack. Fighting was intense and often hand-to-hand as paratroopers advanced through open terrain under heavy fire. At dawn, Lieutenant Colonel H. Jones, the commanding officer of the British forces, led a daring charge against an Argentine machine gun position. He was killed in action, but his leadership inspired his troops to press forward. By the end of the day, the British had captured Goose Green, taking over 900 Argentine prisoners. This victory, though hard fought, marked a turning point in the ground campaign. As British forces closed in on Port Stanley, they faced a series of heavily fortified positions on the surrounding hills. The Battle of Mount Longdon, fought from June 11th to June 12th, was one of the bloodiest engagements of the war. British soldiers of the 3rd Battalion Parachute Regiment advanced under the cover of darkness, scaling steep, rocky slopes while under constant artillery and machine gun fire. The Argentine defenders, entrenched in bunkers, fought with determination, using their knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. The battle devolved into brutal close-quarters combat, with soldiers fighting with bayonets and grenades. By dawn, the British had captured Mount Longdon, but at a heavy cost. 31 British soldiers were killed, and dozens more were wounded. The battles of Mount Harriet, Mount Tumbledown, and Wireless Ridge followed a similar pattern, with British troops overcoming well-defended Argentine positions through a combination of courage, tactics, and superior training. By June 14th, the Argentine defences had crumbled, and British forces entered Port Stanley. How did the psychological toll of these battles shape the soldiers on both sides? The human cost of the war cannot be overlooked. By June 14th, the war had reached its climax. After weeks of relentless fighting, Argentine forces in Port Stanley surrendered. British troops marched into the capital and the Union Jack was raised once again. The victory was celebrated across Britain, cementing Margaret Thatcher's leadership and restoring national pride. For Argentina, the defeat was national humiliation. The junta collapsed within months, and the country transitioned to democracy. Yet the scars of the war lingered, and the Malvinas remained a powerful symbol in Argentine culture. How did the Falklands War shape military strategy and global politics in the decades that followed? Its lessons are still relevant today. The Falklands War was brief but intense, a conflict that tested the limits of endurance and strategy. For Britain, it reaffirmed its global influence and military capability. For Argentina, it was a sobering reminder of the costs of miscalculation. The war also highlighted the human dimensions of conflict, stories of heroism, sacrifice, and resilience that continue to resonate. Today, the Falklands remain British, but the shadow of 1982 lingers, reminding both nations of the price, pride, and the enduring complexity of sovereignty disputes. The Falklands War was fought at the edge of the world, yet its impact was felt globally. It's a story of strategy, sacrifice, and the human spirit, offering lessons that endure far beyond the windswept islands where it was fought. Hi soldiers, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to check back in again soon. That's an order.